There is no silence when Slaanesh takes hold. The corruption does not arrive like a sudden storm or a brutal blow. It seeps, it whispers in the marrow of your bones, it lingers in the pulse of your veins, and it reshapes desire into something unrecognizable. To be corrupted by the Prince of Excess is not merely to fall, it is to be unmade and rewritten into something that hungers beyond hunger, that yearns without end, that becomes the instrument of its own undoing. There is no salvation in this corruption, no chance to walk away unchanged. The corruption of Slaanesh is not only a death sentence, it is a death that stretches on forever. And so the question becomes, what truly happens when Slaanesh corrupts you? What do you become when your will is no longer your own, when the warp itself coils through your spirit and strips away? It never begins with the thunder of war. It never begins with the roar of daemons splitting the veil or the sight of a cultist drenched in the blood of the innocent. No, when Slaanesh reaches for a soul, it begins in silence. A moment, stolen from the chaos of ordinary life. A thought that lingers longer than it should. A voice that does not sound like a voice at all, but rather a vibration in the marrow of your bones. The first whisper is always small enough to be mistaken for your own imagination. That is its cruelty. A miner on a forgotten moon might hear it first while chipping away at the rock, his body broken from long hours and little food. It tells him that the ache in his arms could fade, that he deserves more than rust and dust, that there is joy to be had even in a place that knows none. The whisper coils around his exhaustion like balm, and he listens because no one else has ever spoken to him like this. A scribe on a hive world might hear it in the soft rustle of data slates, the endless cataloging of records that bury her life in dust. The whisper tells her she is more than numbers and ink, that beauty lives within her fingertips if she dares to grasp it. She feels for the first time that she has been seen. Even warriors are not immune. A guardsman standing on the trench line waiting for the next wave of orcs to tear through his regiment might hear it in the silence before dawn. It speaks not of survival, but of freedom. Freedom from orders, from the cold metal of his last gun, from the endless cycle of war fought for worlds he will never see. The whisper tells him there is something beyond. He wants to believe it, if only for the space of one heartbeat. None of them know, in that moment, that the first whisper is the hook. It is never a command, it is never harsh, it is always kind, always warm, always filled with the promise that life could be more than it is. That desire is not sin, but salvation. That pain can be shed. That joy can be eternal. Who among them could resist, when the Imperium offers only duty and death? And yet, it is in this choice, this listening, that the corruption roots itself. For to listen is to answer, and to answer is to invite. The whisper grows with each indulgence. A guardsman who lingers on the thought of freedom begins to dream of it. A miner who allows himself to crave more than survival begins to crave endlessly. A scribe who looks upon her hands with new reverence begins to imagine them shaping a destiny far beyond her station. The tragedy is that they do not see the chain tightening. They mistake it for liberation. They believe the whisper is their own voice guiding them to something better. And in truth, it is better, for a time. The guardsman feels lighter in battle, his fear dulled by a strange anticipation. The miner's pain ebbs, replaced by strength he cannot explain. The scribe writes with fire in her soul, every line upon the slate alive with energy. Their lives seem brighter. They think they have been blessed, but the first whisper never ends with blessing. It ends with hunger, always hunger. For what the whisper awakens is not contentment, but a gnawing ache that cannot be filled. And once the ache begins, there is no going back. They may pray, they may weep, they may beg the emperor for deliverance, but the whisper does not leave. It grows louder in their silence, clearer in their doubt, and sharper in their pain. It is said that even Astartes have heard it. Warriors engineered to resist the lure of the warp, clad in ceramite and bound by the strongest vows of loyalty. Yet even they have moments of weakness, wounds. The first whisper does not stop once it is heard. It returns soft and patient, like a melody you cannot shake. Days may pass, weeks even, before it stirs again, but when it does, it comes with greater clarity. It is no longer a vague murmur in the background. It begins to shape words, to slide between thoughts like a blade slipped through cloth. At first, its presence feels impossible to name, like catching sight of a figure in the corner of your vision only for it to vanish the moment you turn. But the whisper is learning, molding itself to the soul it seeks to ensnare. The miner hears it not in the clang of his tools but in the rhythm of his heartbeat. It tells him that every strike of the pick is wasted, that strength was meant for something greater than clawing at stone. The whisper tempts him with visions of halls carved not from rock, but from radiant crystal, where every breath is ease and every motion a pleasure. His arms ache less now because he has begun to dream of that crystal world. The scribe finds herself hesitating more often, pausing over the endless scrolls of numbers. The whisper slides across her mind like silk, telling her that she is not meant to be forgotten in the dust of records. She begins to write in secret, sketches of poetry tucked between ledgers, her hand trembling with both shame and thrill. The whisper praises her, making her cheeks burn with joy. It feels like intimacy, like someone is watching her and approving when the Imperium never has. And the guardsman, he feels it most acutely. On the line where silence gnaws deeper than gunfire, the whisper lingers like a companion. It tells him to look at his sergeant and see the futility in his orders. It tells him to look at the endless dead and see only waste. It tells him that he could step out of the trench, abandon the regiment, and claim a freedom no chain of command could ever allow. The thought sickens him, but it excites him too. He begins to wonder during the quiet what it would feel like to run. This is how it takes root. Not through violence, not through threat, but through intimacy. The Imperium rules with iron, with decree, with duty and punishment. Slaanesh rules with tenderness, with temptation, with the quiet conviction that you deserve more than what you have been given. To hear the whisper is to feel seen. To obey the Imperium is to feel invisible. Which of those is stronger? Which of those lasts longer in the human heart? The change is subtle at first, a lighter step in the miner's stride, even as his comrades collapse from exhaustion. A softness in the scribe's voice, her eyes brighter than they should be in the candlelit archives. A faint smile on the guardsman's lips in the moments before battle, not born of bravery, but of anticipation. Those who know them best feel uneasy but cannot say why. Something beneath the surface is shifting, and the air around them seems to vibrate faintly with it. And then inevitably comes the moment of choice. The whisper grows bolder, pressing them to act, to test its promises. For the miner, it is the urge to strike down a foreman who has abused him, to take instead of obey. For the scribe, it is the decision to destroy a ledger in defiance of order, to replace cold records with words of her own desire. For the guardsman, it is the terrifying temptation to fire, not at the enemy but into the air, to throw down his weapon, to refuse. These choices are small, yet each is a crack in the wall of loyalty, and each crack widens with time. It is in these moments that corruption becomes inevitable. The whisper no longer feels foreign, it feels like an extension of the self. The guardsman believes the desire for freedom was always his. The miner believes he always longed to be more. The scribe believes the words in her heart were always waiting to be spoken, and in this belief they fall. For Slaanesh does not demand immediate surrender. Slaanesh waits smiling until they believe it was their idea all along. The first whisper becomes the second becomes the third, and soon there is no dividing line between voice and thought, between corruption and desire. What was once a whisper has become the only song they can hear. The first whisper always begins as a secret, but secrets do not remain hidden forever. The miner's hands, once blistered and raw, now move with a strange confidence. He lingers after shifts, staring into the cavern walls as though searching for something beyond stone. His comrades mutter that exhaustion has broken him, but when they look into his eyes they see a light there that unsettles them, a glimmer of purpose that does not belong in the dark. They laugh uneasily, but in their laughter is fear. The scribe too begins to change. Her colleagues notice her drifting, her quill pausing mid-stroke as though listening to a conversation none of them can hear. When questioned, she smiles faintly, as though they are children speaking nonsense. At night, instead of sleep, she writes, not the accounts of grain or tithe, but verses filled with strange cadences, with images that no imperial hymn would ever allow. She hides the pages, but the ink stains linger on her fingers, betraying her. For the guardsman, the shift is sharper, more dangerous. In the lull between firefights, he catches himself smiling, even laughing quietly when shells land nearby. His brothers in arms recoil, whispering prayers under their breath, for laughter has no place on a battlefield drenched in mud and blood. He does not explain. He cannot. How could they understand that the whisper has made the roar of battle sound like a symphony? That each scream is not horror, but part of a greater music only he can hear. But the Imperium watches. It always watches. Suspicion is as natural to its servants as breathing. The overseers note the miner's unearthly vigor. The administratum clerks whisper about the scribe's distraction, and the commissar marks the guardsman's strange composure under fire. In a world ruled by faith and fear, any deviation is dangerous. Punishment falls swiftly, not because guilt is proven, but because the suggestion of heresy is itself a crime, and so the trap tightens. The miner is beaten, accused of idleness. The scribe is reprimanded, her desk searched for contraband. The guardsman is dragged before his commissar, forced to stare down the barrel of a bolt pistol as loyalty oaths are demanded. Yet here lies the cruelest twist of all. The Imperium's punishment does not sever the whisper, it strengthens it. Each lash of the whip, each threat of death, each humiliation confirms what the voice has whispered all along. You are not valued, you are not loved, you are not free. In that moment, pain becomes fuel, desperation becomes hunger, and the whisper, sweet as honey, becomes the only comfort. The miner clutches his chains tighter, not out of obedience, but because he imagines them shattering. The scribe recites her reprimand with bowed head, while inside she composes verses praising the beauty of defiance. The guardsman raises his hand to swear loyalty, but behind his lips he tastes the name of another master. This is how corruption blooms. Not in a sudden blaze, but in slow infection, spreading through flesh and spirit until every heartbeat belongs not to the emperor, but to something else entirely. And though none around them can see the full shape of it yet, the change is already irreversible. The Imperium believes it has frightened them back into obedience. In truth, it has only driven them deeper into the waiting arms of the Dark Prince. The first whisper has become a promise of more than chains, more than silence, more than blood spilled in another's name. The whisper assures them that their suffering has meaning, that every bruise and scar is a step toward ecstasy. And when at last the time comes when silence gives way to song and chains give way to pleasure, they will not resist. They will embrace it as though it was always their destiny. And so the whisper spreads, from the miner's cavern to the scribe's desk, to the guardsman's trench. It travels like a hidden current beneath the surface of imperial life, unseen yet unstoppable. And beyond them, it waits for others, for anyone whose spirit has grown weary of obedience. Hunger is not always for food. In the Imperium, hunger comes in many forms: the hunger of the body, the hunger of the heart, the hunger of the soul. For those who have heard the whisper, this hunger sharpens until every breath becomes a reminder of what they lack. Their lives, once gray and numb, now glow faintly with color, but the colors are fleeting, dissolving too quickly, leaving behind only the ache of wanting more. The miner feels it first in his bones. The endless rhythm of hammer against stone once numbed him, but now he aches for a rhythm beyond labor. When he closes his eyes, he imagines music, wild, forbidden music, that dances through his blood, each note like fire in his veins. The walls no longer feel like stone, they feel like cages. He begins to dig not for awe but for escape, each strike a prayer for release. His comrades see the fever in him, the way his arms move with unnatural strength, and they back away in unease. They do not speak of it, but they feel it. Something in him no longer belongs to them. The scribe's hunger is subtler, but no less consuming. Words that once came to her in neat rows now twist themselves into strange patterns, weaving shapes upon the page that are neither imperial records nor sanctioned prayer. She begins to dream of gatherings where voices rise together, not in hymns to the emperor, but in chants that thrum with life, desire, and defiance. She hides her writings, but not carefully enough. One evening, a fellow clerk notices the odd curve of her letters, the cadence that does not belong. The scribe feels panic grip her heart, but then the whisper returns, reminding her that shame is a tool of chains. Why should she feel shame? Her words are alive. Hers, unlike theirs, have meaning. The guardsman's hunger takes on the shape of blood. In the lull between battles, when others pray for safety or write letters home, he sits silent, craving the chaos of war. The sound of last fire, the scream of artillery, the moment when comrades fall beside him, these no longer horrify him, they intoxicate him. When the commissar praises his discipline under fire, he says nothing. If the commissar knew the truth, that the guardsman does not endure war but craves it, he would put a bolt through his skull without hesitation. Yet even as he fears discovery, a thrill runs through him at the thought of secrets hidden in plain sight. Hunger connects them, though they do not know it yet. Across worlds, across duties, across lives, the whisper binds them together, weaving their desires into a growing chorus. The miner strikes his hammer in time with a rhythm no one else can hear. The scribe's quill scratches out verses that pulse like a heartbeat. The guardsman sharpens his blade not for survival, but for the beauty of the kill. None of them speak the word that lingers on the edge of their minds, for to name it would be to betray themselves. And yet the word waits. Desire becomes ritual. The miner lingers in the dark after shift, striking stone long after others have gone. The scribe writes by candlelight until her hand bleeds, each drop staining her verses with living ink. The guardsman, on nights when silence falls over the trenches, hums softly to himself. Longing is patient, but patience cannot last forever. What begins as a secret pulse inside the heart soon claws outward, seeking air, seeking witness. The miner, once content to keep his rhythm buried in the stone, begins to hum while he works. At first the hum is low, almost inaudible beneath the crash of tools, but it grows, winding itself into the ears of others. Some laugh nervously, telling him to shut his mouth before the overseer hears, but some feel it linger in their chest like an echo. When night falls, those few lie awake, replaying the strange tune in their minds, unable to banish it. The miner does not know he is changing them, but the whisper does. The scribe too begins to slip. She had promised herself to write only in hidden moments, to keep her strange verses veiled, but the hunger in her hand is stronger now. When a datasheet is placed before her, her quill trembles, and instead of neat columns she scratches a curve, a spiral, a symbol. She scratches it out quickly, panicked, but ink stains remain. Her colleagues notice. One whispers that she is tired, another that she is unwell, but unease spreads. In the Imperium, strangeness is dangerous. And yet a single clerk finds herself tracing the spiral absent-mindedly on her palm later that night, though she cannot say why. The infection of longing spreads, invisible yet undeniable. The guardsman knows he cannot afford such slips. Discipline is survival in the trenches, and the commissar's eyes miss nothing. And yet, during drills, when he moves with the unit, his steps begin to carry a rhythm that is not regulation. A sway in the march, a flourish in the thrust of his bayonet, a flicker of joy in his eyes when the sergeant bellows orders. He feels alive when others feel crushed, and though no one dares confront him, they sense it. They see the way he lingers after skirmishes, wiping blood not in disgust but with almost tender care. He tells himself he can control it. The whisper tells him he cannot. Desire reshapes the world around them. The miners' barracks echo faintly at night with quiet humming, each voice unaware that another shares the same melody. The scribe's colleagues dream uneasily, sometimes waking with phrases they do not remember writing, their minds pulling threads from her hidden verses. The guardsman's squad begins to fight with a strange edge, rallying not from faith or command, but from a fever they cannot name, drawn in by his unspoken hunger. But longing is dangerous not only because it spreads, it is dangerous because it demands more. The miner's hammer feels too blunt, too crude to match the rhythm in his mind. He sharpens it, alters it, shaping the tool into something closer to a weapon, though he does not admit this even to himself. The scribe's verses become longer, bolder, almost musical in their cadence, and she hides them not in locked drawers but in places where discovery seems possible, as if she wishes to be caught. The guardsman's restraint weakens with each battle. He stays on the field too long, drags his blade too deep, turns necessity into indulgence. Whispers turn into murmurs. Others begin to notice. The overseer looks suspiciously at the miner, wondering if his fervor is laziness disguised as zeal. The senior clerk frowns at the scribe's strange mistakes, marking them for correction. The commissar narrows his eyes at the guardsman's reckless vigor. The Imperium does not forgive such things. A misstep here, a hesitation there, a slip of the tongue, and punishment would be swift and merciless. And yet the whisper reassures them: what you feel is not weakness, it is strength. Strength the Imperium fears, strength the Emperor has denied you. Hunger feeds on fear. The more they dread discovery, the deeper their longing grows. Each heartbeat becomes a gamble, each breath a rebellion. They tell themselves they are still loyal, still obedient, still servants of the throne. But in the cracks of their denial, desire blossoms. And once desire blossoms, it does not wither, it devours. The miner wakes one night to find his hands moving without his command. In the dimness of the barracks, he feels the rhythm thrumming through his bones as though the bed beneath him were a drum. His knuckles crack as he clenches his fists, and the air around him seems to vibrate with the promise of release. He whispers apologies to no one, to everyone, as he carves shapes into the wooden frame of his cot, circles within circles, spirals coiling endlessly. By dawn his palms are raw with splinters, but he cannot stop staring at the pattern. He tells himself it was nothing, a dream perhaps, yet when his fellow miners shuffle awake, their eyes linger too long on his hands, and some hum the tune he thought only he knew. The scribe's descent is quieter, but no less dangerous. She has begun to hear voices in the margins of her own writing, words she does not remember inscribing that nevertheless pulse with beauty and dread. Her fingers tremble when she traces them, not in fear but in awe. The lines are exquisite, sharper than any verse she ever conceived. Not mine, she whispers, though she keeps them, cherishes them, recites them under her breath like prayer. Her pulse quickens when she imagines others reading them, mouths shaping syllables birthed from her hand. She is no longer writing alone. Something else has joined her, and she welcomes its company. The guardsman can hide nothing. War makes his hunger blaze too brightly, too openly. He throws himself into combat with a fervor that unnerves even his comrades. When last bolts cut through the air, he moves as if he can hear music in their pitch, ducking and weaving with a grace that no drill taught him. When his bayonet plunges into flesh, he feels not revulsion but a thrill, and he savors the rhythm of breath leaving a dying foe. He still mutters litanies to the Emperor, still kneels before the Aquila when ordered, but in the back of his mind another prayer forms, wordless, pulsing, intoxicating. He fears it, and yet he does not wish it gone. All three believe they are still themselves. All three cling to the illusion that their desires are private, secret, harmless. But the truth is etched into every hum, every scribbled verse, every too graceful strike. They are no longer solitary creatures resisting temptation. They are pieces of a larger pattern, threads already woven into a design too vast for them to see. And once the warp begins its feast, there is no retreat. Identity is fragile in the Imperium. Men and women are told who they are from the moment they can walk. Worker, soldier, scribe, nothing more. Their names are swallowed by ranks and numbers, their faces blurred by the endless tide of humanity. But within the miner, the scribe and the guardsman, something has begun to stir that does not fit the rigid molds hammered into them. Longing has grown teeth, and now it bites into their very sense of self, gnawing until what remains no longer resembles the people they once believed themselves to be. The miner feels it most acutely when the overseer calls his designation aloud. Once he would have snapped to attention, obedient as the stones he shattered. Now the syllables sound hollow, like a word spoken in a foreign tongue. He does not answer immediately. His delay earns him a lash across the back, but even as pain sears his flesh, he cannot shake the thought that name is not mine. Beneath the sting of the whip he feels a second rhythm thrumming in his chest, and it whispers of another identity, one older, freer, more true. He does not know its shape, only that the false shell he wears is cracking. The scribe is losing her reflection. She used to study herself in polished metal, smoothing her robes, ensuring no ink smudges betrayed sloppiness. But now when she looks, she sees her face shifting in ways she cannot describe. Her eyes seem too wide, her lips slightly curved as though holding a secret. The reflection does not mimic her exactly. Sometimes the mouth moves a fraction before hers does, sometimes the gaze lingers longer than her own. She tells herself it is exhaustion, but exhaustion does not make her laugh softly at the strangeness. Exhaustion does not make her want to lean closer, to press her hand against the cold surface, to ask the other her what it sees. The guardsman has become a stranger to his comrades. They do not say it aloud, fear of reprisal keeps lips tight, but they glance at him sidelong when he smiles at the wrong moment, when he seems too eager for deployment, when he returns from patrol with a brightness in his eyes no battlefield should grant. One night as they huddle against the cold, one mutters, "You're not right." The guardsman only grins, teeth glinting in the half-light, and replies, "Neither are you." The soldier who spoke goes silent, unsettled, yet he cannot deny that something about those words lingers. The whisper uses him now, shaping not only his desires but the fears of those around him. Their dissent is not loud, it does not need to be. A change of tone here, a shiver of the hand there, a pause before answering to one's name. These small fractures spread like hairline cracks through a wall. Soon the wall will crumble, but for now it stands, deceiving any who glance too quickly. Yet within the rot deepens. At times they each hear voices, not full sentences, not yet but fragments, like distant choirs echoing through cavernous halls. The miner hears them when his pick strikes stone, each clang shaping syllables that vanish before he can grasp them. The scribe hears them in the scratch of her quill, vowels hidden within the sound of ink across parchment. The guardsman hears them in last fire, in the pounding of boots on mud, in the ragged gasps of dying men. Each time they strain to catch more, and each time the voices recede, teasing, promising, commanding. None of them dares to confess this. To speak such madness aloud would mean death, or worse. But silence cannot save them either. For the warp does not need permission to carve its mark into the soul, it only needs hunger, and hunger once welcomed will consume. The miner dreams now, though once he never did. In the dark exhaustion of endless shifts, he used to collapse into blankness, waking only when sirens blared, but now each night visions seep into him like promethium into dry cloth. He finds himself wandering caverns not carved by mortal hands. The stone there glistens wet, alive, and it throbs faintly with the same rhythm that has haunted him. In these dreams he does not carry his pick, he carries something sharper, something that glows faintly with impossible hues. His body moves in ways he does not command, striking patterns into the walls, carving spirals that grow, that pulse, that sing. When he wakes, his hands ache, and the skin beneath his nails is blackened, as if he truly had been working with some alien ore. He says nothing, but his eyes linger too long on shadows, searching for tunnels that do not exist. The scribe no longer trusts language, and yet she cannot escape it. Words betray her, spilling from her quill with shapes that do not belong to her mind. She tries to write reports, but every letter bends toward curves, every column of numbers collapses into swirls. The more she scratches them out, the stronger the urge becomes to let them flow, to see the page covered in the beauty of forbidden symbols. Her desk is a battlefield of erasures, torn parchment, blotches of ink that smell almost metallic. Worse still, she has begun to hear her own voice reciting lines she never intended. In the silence of her quarters, she catches herself whispering poetry with no origin. She slaps her own mouth shut, heart hammering, but later she finds the verses etched into the walls with ink she does not remember holding. It is not madness, it is invasion, and part of her does not want it to stop. The guardsman feels no invasion, he feels revelation. The battlefield has become a cathedral, every blast and scream a hymn, every corpse an offering. He moves with grace, now too much grace, the kind that draws eyes. His comrades mutter when they think he cannot hear. He fights like he's dancing. One hisses, they are right. He feels it, the rhythm in his blood, the music of slaughter. When he charges, he feels guided by a presence, as though an unseen hand conducts the battle around him. He no longer prays in the chapel. The litanies taste dry, dead. Instead he prays silently to the music itself, though he dares not name it. Yet in his chest he feels it knows him, that it has always known him. Each of them hides, but poorly. The miner's spirals now creep onto the edges of his tools, small scratches no one notices. Yet, the scribe's verses find their way into official documents, twisted within margins, concealed but waiting to be uncovered. The guardsman's fervor grows too bright to conceal, his laughter too sharp in moments of death. They still think they can manage it, still think they are clever enough to balance loyalty with desire, but self-deception is the warp's favorite weapon. It allows corruption to flourish quietly. The miner's strength begins to frighten even him. His arms move with a rhythm, not born from toil but from something deeper, stranger, as though the stone itself bows to his desire. One shift when his pickaxe strikes, the rock splits too easily, shearing open with a sound like a scream. Dust rises thick in the air, glittering with faint violet hues unseen by others. He blinks rapidly, coughs, pretends nothing happened, but inside he trembles. The rhythm he once thought was hidden in the stone has moved into him. The overseer's orders grow distant, meaningless, drowned beneath the steady thrum in his chest. When he closes his eyes, he no longer sees tunnels. He sees vast caverns stretching into infinity, walls alive with spiral carvings that glow and pulse with his heartbeat. He is no longer just a miner. He is something else, though he cannot yet name it. The scribe no longer writes for the administratum. Her quill may scratch across sanctioned reports, but the ink tells different stories. She finds her own hands betraying her, scrawling verses in the margins, lines that bleed with beauty and dread. The words are no longer hers, and yet they are more hers than anything she has ever written. She stops sleeping, caught between terror of what her pen will reveal next, and an insatiable hunger to see it. By candlelight she traces her own lines across her skin, her arms becoming scrolls, her body parchment. When she washes, the ink stains remain as if seared into her flesh. She whispers to her reflection in polished metal, and it whispers back, its mouth moving not quite in time with hers. The face in the reflection smiles wider, as if proud of her. She does not look away. The guardsman's descent is swiftest. His comrades keep their distance now. In battle he moves like a predator unleashed, darting ahead of formation, striking with flourishes that make a mockery of discipline. The commissar has noticed. How could he not? Yet even the commissar hesitates. To punish the guardsman would be to punish victory itself, for his fervor wins skirmishes, his unholy vigor inspires troops. He whispers to the wounded as they die, not the emperor's litanies but strange words that soothe and unsettle. Some die smiling beneath his gaze, as though he has given them a glimpse of something beyond pain. He feels no shame. Shame is gone, burned away in the heat of his new worship. In its place there is only music, and the music tells him he is chosen. Together though apart, the miner, the scribe, and the guardsman spiral downward. They no longer resist. Resistance itself feels alien, unnecessary. What once horrified them now comforts them. The miner's spirals are beautiful. The scribe's verses are truth. The guardsman's ecstasy in battle is holy. Each believes themselves touched by something greater, though none dare name it, for naming would make it real, and making it real would strip away the last pretenses of loyalty to the throne. And yet deep within they know their loyalty is already gone. Their dreams converge, though they never meet. Each begins to dream the same place, a great hall without walls, endless, shimmering with impossible colors. A voice thrums there, too vast to belong to any one throat, too intimate to feel distant. It does not speak in words but in desire, in rhythm, in song. They wake with tears on their faces, with hearts pounding, with a certainty that they are not alone. They never were, they never will be. This is the descent not into madness, not into death, but into belonging. The Imperium calls it corruption, the whisper calls it truth, and as their old selves peel away like dead skin they feel something terrifying and glorious. Freedom. The mine shaft trembled underfoot, though no tremor was recorded on the auspex. The overseers muttered about faulty calibrations, cursed the tech priests, and ordered the men back to work. But the miner knew. He felt the earth's pulse in his bones, a rhythm not of stone, but of something buried deeper, older, waiting. When his pick struck, the rocks did not shatter as they once had. They peeled back, layers curling open like skin, exposing veins of metal that glowed faintly even in darkness. The overseers praised him, called him efficient, promised him rations above standard. They could not hear the whispers that seeped from the cracks, urging him to dig faster, urging him to free what lay below. He obeyed, not their orders but the song rising through the bedrock, a song only he seemed to hear. In the administratum office, the scribe's contamination spread silently. Clerks shuffled through her data slates, unaware that beneath the approved tallies and inventories something else was written. Her hidden verses flowed into the margins, words that rearranged themselves when read aloud, twisting the tongue, reshaping the air. A junior clerk once stumbled upon her work, chuckled at the strange phrases, and read a line for amusement. By the end of the day his laughter was gone. He stared blankly at nothing, his quill frozen, and that night he gouged spirals into his desk until his fingers bled. No one connected it to her. No one suspected her hands had become vessels for a voice that was not her own. For the guardsmen, the battlefield became a theater of revelation. The regiment had begun to revere him in whispers, though never openly in the commissar's presence. They saw how bullets curved away from him, how blades slipped past his flesh as though afraid to cut. They saw how he laughed when the enemy charged, laughed in joy, not mockery. He began to fight without orders, and yet his defiance brought victory after victory. His commanders called it instinct. Podsitint. His squadmates called it blessing, but he knew it was the music, the pulse of something vast flowing through his veins, carrying him forward in ecstatic rhythm. He whispered his liturgies of joy into dying ears, and more than one soldier met death with a smile, as though they too had glimpsed the truth in his voice. And so, without declaration, without rebellion, ruin spread like rot beneath paint. The Imperium's face remained stern, its laws intact, its discipline harsh. But behind that mask, change seeped through every crack, a miner whose strength unnerved even his overseers, a scribe whose verses infected the minds of her peers, a guardsman whose fury turned to worship. None of them sought to overthrow the Imperium, none thought themselves traitors. They only followed the rhythm they could not unhear, the song that bound them together in secret dreams. At first the echoes were small, a worker humming a tune he could not remember learning, a clerk drawing spirals in the corner of a report, a soldier smiling in the face of certain death. The overseers chalked it to fatigue, the commissar to morale, the scribe's superiors to clerical error. But the echoes grew, they always grow. The warp is patient, and patience is its cruelest weapon. What begins as whispers becomes chorus, and chorus becomes truth. In the nights their dreams grew louder. They no longer dreamed alone. They stood together now in that endless hall without walls, three souls meeting though their waking selves had never crossed paths. They did not speak, they did not need to. The voice was with them, the song was in them, and the spirals carved themselves across the void floor at their feet. They were no longer bound by their stations, miner, scribe, guardsman. They were bound by something higher, something the Imperium would call damnation, something they would come to call destiny. The manufactorum bells tolled for shift change, a clang so familiar that no one questioned its cadence. Yet lately the rhythm felt off. Slightly longer pauses between notes, a faint echo that lingered beyond the metal. The workers muttered, shook their heads, and pressed harder into their labors. To falter in service was to invite the lash. But at night, when the halls were silent and only the machine's after-song remained, some swore they could still hear the bell tolling in the distance, even when no bell had rung. The miner's gift grew undeniable. He unearthed veins that the Auspex had declared barren, striking riches where no one else could. Men began to shadow him, following his swings, convinced his presence alone made the stone yield. But envy breeds suspicion, and one overseer followed him down a shaft after curfew. In the half-light, he saw the miner kneeling, forehead pressed against the rock, whispering to it like kin. The overseer drew breath to shout, But before sound left his lips, the wall seemed to stir, stone fractured without touch, spilling ore across the floor as though in offering. The overseer fled, swore never to speak of it. The miner smiled in the dark, knowing the earth itself had listened. The scribe's verses began to escape the page. She had once confined them to margins, hidden between columns of inventory. Now her words slipped onto Vox recordings, infiltrating official correspondence. A governor received a requisition order and found lines of strange poetry embedded in the script, blooming across the parchment like mold. He tore it apart, burned it, and yet weeks later, fragments appeared again in his own notes, written in his own hand. He prayed more often after that. He did not realize he was repeating her phrases in his litanies. Her reach was no longer limited to parchment. Her words moved like disease, unseen, untraceable, and irreversible. The guardsman's legend spread among the ranks. Soldiers began to mimic his chants in the trenches, a half-joking ritual to summon his fortune. When he passed, men saluted not in regulation style, but with hands pressed to their hearts, as though pledging to him rather than to the Aquila. Officers frowned at the unorthodox fervor, but they did not intervene. Results spoke louder than regulation, and wherever he stood, victory followed. In the Vox records of battle, one could hear his laughter echoing above the din, a sound both dreadful and exulting. Some described it as courage. Others admitted in whispers that it felt like worship. Across the hive, small incidents compounded into rumor. Servitors malfunctioned in the presence of certain hymns, their ocular lenses burning out. When scribes spoke verses too clearly, a squad of Skitari froze mid-march, turning their heads in unison as if listening to an invisible choir. The astropaths dreamt of spirals and awoke bleeding from their eyes. These were dismissed as coincidence, or hushed up as isolated failures. But the pattern was clear. The warp had found a foothold, and its echoes resonated through steel, flesh, and stone alike. The three never met in the waking world, yet they felt each other's breath in dreams, saw each other's shadows flicker in corridors, as if the distance between them was only illusion. The Imperium taught that faith bound humanity to the Emperor, but faith has many faces, and in the darkness, another bond was forming, one the Imperium could never sanction. A bond that needed no cathedral, no priest, no gilded shrine, only a whisper carried on a breath, a verse scrawled in ink, a laugh echoing across no man's land. And still, the echoes deepened. A commissar inspecting the ranks paused when he heard soldiers chanting beneath their breath. He demanded. The hive's air itself began to feel altered, though few could articulate how. Workers whispered that it tasted sweeter after certain shifts, tinged with something almost floral, though no bloom had grown on that poisoned rock in centuries. Others said the shadows lasted longer than they should, bending at angles that defied the geometry of their halls. Vox units carried faint songs when unpowered, threads of melody so quiet one might mistake them for memory. But memory has edges, and these songs had none. They wound endlessly, always changing, always the same. The miner, the scribe, and the guardsman became lodestones without seeking it. People gathered near them instinctively, as though warmth radiated from their presence. When the miner strode through the tunnels, workers felt their own tools strike truer, their backs ache less. When the scribe passed through archives, junior clerks wrote faster, and entire wings of records seemed easier to decipher. When the guardsmen entered the mess hall, laughter bloomed louder, even among men nursing broken ribs and shrapnel wounds. They became more than themselves. They became centers of gravity, and all who drifted close were drawn into the same orbit. What spread was not a cult in the traditional sense. No idols were built, no oaths spoken, no shrines consecrated. It was subtler than that. A look shared across a factory line, a chant murmured beneath breath, a verse scribbled in margins. And yet it was stronger than any chapel sermon, for it was lived rather than taught, felt rather than commanded. The Imperium's faith bound men to duty through discipline and fear. This other faith bound them through desire, through yearning, through hunger for something nameless, but palpable in every moment of silence. Command began to notice the shift. Reports of unsanctioned behavior crossed desks, petitions for disciplinary measures stacked in offices. Some officials demanded crackdowns, others whispered that morale was improving, productivity was climbing, victories were multiplying. To quash this unnamed current might be to sever the very vein feeding the war effort. And so, for a time, hesitation reigned. Hesitation, the Imperium's most dangerous luxury. It was during that hesitation that the first true sign emerged. In the darkness of a battlefield trench, beneath skies streaked red with trace of fire, the guardsman raised his voice above the din. What left his mouth was not the hymn of the imperial creed, nor the barked orders of officers, nor any chant sanctioned by the Ministorum. It was something new, and yet older than any empire. A rhythm that made the heart tremble, a song that sounded like 1,000 voices moving in unison, though only one throat sang. Men dropped their rifles, not in fear, but in awe. They felt the pull of something vast, something watching, something waiting. And in that moment, the echoes became undeniable. Not whispers in dreams, not scribbles on parchment, not lucky strikes in minds. They became thunder rolling through every soul present. The warp had ceased to wait outside. It had stepped inside, gentle as a breath, final as a curse. Yet whether those who felt it were blessed or damned, that even now remained uncertain. For destiny, once twisted, rarely unfolds in ways mortals can predict. The corruption of the warp does not spread like fire, nor like plague, nor like any contagion mankind has known. Fire consumes, leaving only ash. Plague kills, leaving bodies to rot. But the warp is subtler, more patient, more inexorable. It seeps like water into cracks, invisible at first, swelling quietly until stone itself is split apart. And once the fracture begins, no wall can hold forever. The first to notice were the astropaths, blind to the material world but attuned to the tides beyond. They began to scream during transmissions, clutching their skulls as if their very thoughts were aflame. Their cries echoed down the corridors of communication spires, scarring all who heard them. Some clawed their own eyes, though they had none to tear. Others collapsed, murmuring the same half-formed phrases, syllables of languages unrecorded by any lexicon. The choirs grew thinner, their ranks broken by madness, and still command pressed them to call out across the void, for silence, in war, is death. In the manufacturer, machines began to falter in stranger ways. Gears turned at odd tempos, producing rhythms almost like heartbeat and song. Sparks fell into patterns too deliberate to dismiss as random. Data slates corrupted not with code, but with script and image no cogitator had ever stored. Curling runes, half faces, shifting geometries that made eyes ache if studied too long. Tech priests attempted to purge them with sacred oils and prayers, but more often than not, the errors spread further. Some magi began to whisper that perhaps the machines themselves were listening, and worse, responding. Among the Astra Militarum regiments, fractures deepened. Squads no longer obeyed orders with blind efficiency. Some interpreted commands in ways so strange they might have been following a different commander entirely. When officers demanded discipline, soldiers looked back with eyes glowing faintly in the low light of trench lamps, not blazing, not yet, but shimmering like embers beneath ash. It was not rebellion, not outright. It was something more insidious. Obedience shifted to a rhythm that was not the Imperium's, a rhythm that pulsed, unseen yet felt in every chest. Whispers carried far beyond the hive. Merchant captains swore that void ships passing through the system's lanes shuddered at strange intervals, as though space itself resisted their travel. Gellar fields flickered, not failing entirely, but bending inward, showing fleeting shapes pressed against their barriers, mouths, hands, endless eyes staring without blinking. For seconds at a time, the thin membrane between sanity and ruin trembled, and even hardened voidsmen wept when the lights steadied again. The spiral was not only outward, but inward. The miner who once swung his pick with vigor now found veins opening before him without effort, as though stone itself sought to please him. The scribe's quill never dulled, scratching endlessly as if words poured from her hand faster than her own mind could follow. The guardsman, once an orphan son of a forgotten world, now found his voice commanding silence and attention, even from officers who had never seen him before. He was becoming something, not a commander, not a saint, not yet a monster, but something more, or perhaps less than human, and in the stillness between these changes, the warp began to show its shape, not directly. The warp is not satisfied with whispers alone. What begins as suggestion soon deepens into command, though it never calls itself such. To those who hear it, the voice arrives as memory, as longing, as half-remembered truths that feel older than their bloodlines. The miner dreamed not of rock and sweat, but of endless caverns where the walls pulsed like flesh and veins glowed with starlight. He woke trembling, yet his hands reached instinctively for tools, eager to shape stone into forms he had never been taught. The scribe, too, found her pages filling with patterns more intricate than words, spirals so precise they seemed crafted with compasses no human hand could wield. She could not stop herself. Her ink pots ran dry, her fingers blistered, but still she wrote. The guardsman suffered most of all, for he became more than the sum of his flesh. Voices gathered around him when he slept, singing in tones too vast for human throats. They told him he was chosen, that he was the bridge between silence and song, between ash and flame. He fought to resist, clutching his last rifle, as if it alone could anchor him to the material world. But each time he stepped onto the battlefield, his steps drew echoes not only in mud but in air, in blood, in the very screams of the dying. Men followed him not because they wished to, but because something within them demanded it. Rumors spread beyond the trenches and manufactura, carried by terrified lips to shrines and chapels. Priests of the Ministorum railed against invisible heresies, denouncing cults they could not find, warning against practices they could not name. Some congregations swelled, voices raised in desperate hymns to drown the creeping dissonance. Others dwindled, their members drawn elsewhere, following faint melodies down streets, lit only by the failing glow of lumen strips. In the halls of the ecclesiarchy, debates raged whether to call for inquisitorial intervention. Yet hesitation lingered, for to summon the Inquisition was to admit failure, and worse, to invite judgment not only on the heretic, but on the commanders who had allowed heresy to take root. Pride as ever became the Imperium's blindfold. The system itself bent further. Warp storms flickered along its edges, faint and inconsistent, but enough to distort navigation. Merchant fleets reported vanishing vessels, their transponders shrieking once, then falling silent forever. Others arrived weeks late, though their captains swore they had lost only hours. Planets in neighboring sectors whispered of omens, skies lit by false constellations, statues weeping blood, beasts born with too many eyes. None of it could be proven, yet all of it carried the same undertone. The spiral widened, and still those at the heart of it did not break. The miner labored, the scribe wrote, the guardsman fought, yet each act became less theirs and more borrowed. They were becoming instruments, strings plucked by unseen fingers. To watch them was to feel unease, for even when their faces were calm, their movements graceful, their eyes betrayed something else. A flicker, a gleam, a hunger, as though another self watched from behind the flesh. Some called it blessing. They whispered that perhaps the Emperor's hand moved in secret, crafting saints from the lowliest of the faithful. Others whispered the opposite, that what moved in them was no hand of light, but a claw of shadow, coiling tighter each day. But in the end whispers matter little. What mattered was that more began to follow. Not just soldiers, not just clerks, not just miners. Entire regiments shifted, entire guilds bent, entire streets sang melodies no human choir had written. The spiral was no longer hidden. It was visible in banners repainted without sanction, in symbols carved into armor plates. By the time the spiral reached its final turn, no one could agree when it had truly begun. Some said it started with the miner's dreams, others with the scribe's writings, others with the guardsman's voice raised in battle. But such questions became meaningless, for the spiral did not begin, nor did it end. It only widened, circling outward, until all within its grasp were caught in its endless pull. The guardsman's regiment was the first to vanish. Official records stated they were redeployed to the front, their banners reassigned, their names struck from rosters, but whispers said otherwise. Men spoke of transports leaving under moonless skies, carrying soldiers who sang in perfect harmony, their eyes glowing faintly as they boarded. Not one of them looked back. When asked where they were bound, they answered only, toward the song. None returned. The scribe disappeared more quietly. Her desk was found immaculate, quills sharpened, inkpots full. Only the parchment bore traces of her presence, reams upon reams of curling spirals, layered upon one another until the pages were black with ink. When archivists tried to destroy them, the fires burned cold, refusing to consume. Some swore the spirals continued to shift even as the parchment turned to ash. Eventually, the pages were locked away in sealed vaults, their location known only to a handful of clerks too afraid to ever speak of them again. The miner's fate was stranger still. One morning, his comrades found the tunnels widened, carved smooth not by tools but by some greater force. The walls shimmered faintly, as though coated in liquid glass, and the miner was gone. Only his helmet remained, resting upon a stone pedestal that had not been there before. Those who touched it claimed they heard the sound of great wings unfolding, stretching wider than the cavern itself. The helmet too was sealed away, marked as relic or blasphemy depending on who recorded the account, and so the spiral claimed them all, but it did not end with them. Their echoes remained, rippling outward through those who had once followed them. Songs carried down void ship corridors, carved spirals etched into hab-block walls, children chanting half-remembered verses in languages no tutor had taught. Priests denounced them as heresy, officers called for purges, administratum scribes stamped records closed, but the spiral had no need for names or records or shrines. It lived where men dreamed. It breathed where silence lingered. It grew wherever cracks appeared in certainty. The Inquisition did arrive. In time, they scoured the hive, purged archives, executed commanders, burned manufacturer to ash. Their ships blotted out the skies. Their agents spoke in voices colder than steel. And yet as they departed, even they could not silence what remained. For somewhere in the void between stars, songs continued. Somewhere spirals widened in ink and stone. Somewhere the warp smiled. The Imperium, as always, would endure. It had endured worse. It would endure this. But endurance is not immunity, and survival is not victory. For in every shadow where men fear, in every silence where they pray, in every crack where certainty falters, the spiral waits, unending.